Dark Phoenix Saga is frequently celebrated as the greatest X-Men story of all time, and not without merit. The story features a dynamic narrative with a great sense of pace, important developments in the X-Men continuity, the introduction of some beloved and iconic characters, and a deep emotional core that culminates in the tragic death of an original X-Men. Like the Killing Joke for Batman or the death of Gwen Stacy for Spider-Man, the Dark Phoenix Saga is looked at as a defining moment from a classic superhero franchise. But what if I told you that there was another X-Men story that hit a lot of the same notes as the Dark Phoenix Saga? A story that wasn't just derivative of Dark Phoenix, however, but in many ways improved upon the original. I should point out that one of the main purposes behind the Claremont run project is to account for a fundamental contradiction in the way that scholars talk about Chris Claremont's run. He is identified as the master of long continuity in superhero comics, yet the Dark Phoenix Saga was actually quite early in his 16-year run on Uncanny X-Men comics. Flip the chronology of X-Men comics, and one of the last major events that Claremont composed, with the help from his dear friend and longtime editor Louise Simonson, among others, is a story called Inferno. Inferno unfolds across the pages of Uncanny X-Men, X-Factor, and New Mutants, the three core X-books of the time. But it also spills into innumerable other Marvel properties, including Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and even the Avengers. The core story is that a member of the New Mutants, Illyana Rasputin, is tricked into raising hell on Earth, and the current roster of X-Men, combined with the original X-Men, who now go by the name X-Factor, have to put it right by battling Mr. Sinister and a whole lot of demons in what's left of New York City. Their main foe, however, is one of their own, at least in the X-Men storyline, Madeline Pryor, here cast into the Dark Phoenix role. She's a longtime X-Men ally who also happens to be Cyclops' estranged wife, though abandoned might be a better term, mother to his son, who, fun fact, will grow up to be the very popular character Cable, and current lover of Cyclops' screw-up brother Havoc. Madeline, motivated by maternal instinct combined with a mounting sense of frustration and hurt, has made a deal with the devil, so to speak, in order to find her lost son. As with all such deals, the cost will be her soul, and we as readers are left to watch the demons come to collect as Madeline transforms from a beloved character to the Goblin Queen of Inferno's new hellscape. For context, Claremont plotted the core story with Simonson and wrote the Uncanny X-Men portion of it. Where the Dark Phoenix Saga was isolated to a single core text, Inferno sprawled across 13 different series within the Marvel Universe. Even in isolation to just the X-Men portion, Inferno is a huge story. The beginning of Inferno is arguably the events of the Mutant Massacre, Mr. Sinister's first attack on the Uncanny X-Men, which begins in Uncanny X-Men number 210 in 1986. The Inferno storyline would eventually wrap with the seeming death of Mr. Sinister in 1989, so we're talking 3 years of build-up into this story. In fact, Marvel released a hardcover edition of the Inferno prologue recently. It is 824 pages long, a very long prologue. Now, quantity, of course, does not equal quality, but in this case it certainly contributes something. The depth of character development in the series in the build-up to Inferno is remarkable. Greatly enhancing the story here is the culmination of years upon years of character development at a depth and level that exceeds the Dark Phoenix Saga. As good as those characters are in that series, a decade later they have grown and changed considerably. Their voices have become more distinct, just as new voices have been added to the cast, each with something new to offer. To put a literary take on things, the famous novelist and scholar E.M. Forster argues that the distinction between a flat character and a round character is that a flat character can usually be defined by a single sentence, a single motivation, where a round character, or a strong character, is not so easily summarized. Claremont's characters were good to begin with, but in exploring the canvas provided by years of storytelling in the X-Men universe, time made them better, to the point that Inferno gives us a Wolverine who is both noble and primal, a Cyclops who is both duty-bound and selfish, an Angel who is both brutal and idealistic, and a Storm who is both merciful and not at all someone to be messed with. Adding to all of this, of course, is the creative freedom and control that Claremont had achieved as a result of years of market dominance, a control that he did not have during the Dark Phoenix Saga, when even the fate of the Phoenix was ultimately decided by editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. So close to 10 years later, we have Claremont returning to many of the iconic storytelling components that he first put forward in the Dark Phoenix Saga. Both feature a dynamic lead female character who is driven to violence through the unnatural emergence of an alternate self, with specific connotations to their repressed emotions. Both explore the gender politics implicit in the superhero genre, and the discomfort created by empowered women, or in these cases, super-empowered women. Both feature interference from alternate planes of existence, cosmic beings in the case of Dark Phoenix, and demons in the case of Inferno. Both force the X-Men to choose between moral righteousness and family loyalty, essentially putting their dream at odds with their shared bond. We might even say that Inferno is something of a Dark Phoenix clone, which works all too well, seeing as Madeline Pryor is a literal clone of Jean Grey. Her awareness of this is actually an important source of her anger and eventual corruption, as is the presence of the Phoenix Force itself, which, by the way, Madeline is also a host for. To be fair, in some ways the similarities might seem to suggest a creative bankruptcy, a sort of, I've got nothing, let's just do Dark Phoenix again mentality. And that mentality has certainly affected the X-Men franchise negatively in more recent years. But the execution in Inferno suggests more of a revival than a regurgitation. If Inferno is Dark Phoenix 2.0, it finds ways to update and advance key aspects of the original X-Men superstory. For one thing, Madeline Pryor is given a sense of agency and righteousness that Dark Phoenix never had. Madeline first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 163 in 1983. She was not a superhero, just a pilot who fell in love with Cyclops, married him, and despite the existential terrors that a wife of a sometimes X-Man must face, she decided to have a family with him. This went bad, however, when Cyclops learned that Jean Grey was still alive, and he left Madeline and their son to form X-Factor with Jean and the original X-Men. Shortly thereafter, Madeline was attacked by Mr. Sinister's marauders and left for dead, before being discovered by the X-Men in a San Francisco hospital. From there, she joined the team, despite having no powers other than a sense of decency and courage that bordered on the supernatural themselves. At this point, the X-Men had embraced a paramilitary approach to mutant threats, and Madeline stood out within the individual books for her sense of humanity, her emotional sympathy, and her bald idealism in the face of a violent and terrible world. In Cyclops' brother Havoc, Madeline found a kindred soul, another human being filled with self-doubt, living in the shadow of a better version of themselves. In all facets, the story of Madeline Pryor is compelling and innately heroic. She even volunteered to die with the X-Men in order to protect the world. Yet in spite of the strength of character that Claremont imbued Madeline Pryor with, her sense of feeling lost and betrayed leaves her vulnerable to corruption at the hands of Inferno's demons. Thus, it is all the more poignant that even when Madeline Pryor completes her transformation to Goblin Queen, she remains sympathetic to the reader. She's evil, like baby-killing evil, but she has reason to be evil in a way that Dark Phoenix maybe never had. It was just a malevolent force that craved destruction. Madeline craves revenge, but she deserves revenge. And having a more sympathetic villain lends something to the moral complexity of the narrative that unfolds. This theme of good people who've made bad choices is extended into the broader cast of X-Men characters, thus establishing an intriguing parallel between who the X-Men are and who it is they are made to fight. One way that this surfaces is through the setting. Having the X-Men consigned to Hell on Earth during Inferno, in response to some of the bad choices that they made, is an effective way to complicate and explore the morality of what they do. This gives them a purpose in Inferno, a metaphorical journey of self-reflection beyond that which they had in Dark Phoenix, and allows Claremont to explore the collective consciousness of the group in some new and compelling ways. Watching certain members of the team embrace their darker natures and turn their backs on moral righteousness gives us a sense of perspective on what their traditionally heroic actions really mean, and just how thin the line is that separates X-Man from Goblin Queen. The X-Men get to come back from this hell. Madeline dies in it, so lost and alone, in fact, that she would try to sacrifice her own son to get her revenge. She has lost absolutely everything, even her values. And where Jean Grey receives a hero's death at the end of Dark Phoenix, Madeline Pryor is not so lucky. All in told, there's a grit and texture to Inferno that takes the fundamental Dark Phoenix narrative to a place that is darker, more mature, more opaque. It isn't a saga, it's a tragedy. Ultimately, the difference has to come to rest on continuity. If you have a friend who is new to X-Men and asks what a good read might be, you can't give them Inferno. It would just be confusing. It would be alienating. Dark Phoenix is accessible and brilliant at the same time. Inferno, however, is brilliant as well, And if you have a friend with a bit more time on their hands who is willing to engage with the broader, brilliant continuity of X-Men comics, you might tell them to at least look forward to Inferno. Thank you for watching our video. You can learn more about Chris Claremont's run on X-Men Comics at our website, www.claremontrun.com, and you can follow the project on Twitter @ClaremontRun.